All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on another edition of our Franchise Your Business podcast and webinar series. My name is Tom Dufour. I'm the founder and CEO of Big Sky Franchise Team. And if you're new to us here, these are live sessions we like to take on practical ideas and actual things that you can actualize to take one step little bit more forward in whatever the topic is about. And today's topic, by the way, is how to stop overeating for business owners. And I know that's a topic that maybe is something that folks might not want to talk about or hear about, but I find it very interesting. And since we work mostly with successful entrepreneurs, I think this is a great topic to bring on. And Dr. Livingston is our guest today. And if you missed him, he was actually on our Multiply Your Success podcast maybe a year or so ago. It's been, and he is the founder of Defeat Your Cravings and former CEO of a multi-million dollar consulting firm serving Fortune 500 clients. His work has been featured in major media outlets, including the New York Times, LA Times, ABC, CBS, and a whole lot of other places. Dr. Livingston has spent decades researching overeating and binge behavior, including a self-funded study with more than 40,000 participants. That is a lot of participation for research, folks. So that is the real deal. So with that, Dr. Livingston, thank you so much for being here and being willing to share some of this information.
Thank you so much for having me. Hopefully I can be useful, and please call me Glenn.
Absolutely. Well, Glenn, I'd love to just talk a little bit about this idea of entrepreneurs, overeating, founders. Why is it that maybe these folks start to struggle with this in the first place?
Well, entrepreneurs are subject to a unique set of stressors where we're much more driven than the general population. I've heard it said that an entrepreneur is someone who'll work 23 hours for himself because he doesn't want to work 1 hour for anybody else. Um, we tend to be much more hyper focused so that when we're involved in a project, I don't know about you, but when I needed to get a project out, it was 90 days, leave me alone. There is nothing else on my, that's all I can concentrate on for 90 days. Um, and unfortunately, that includes things like sleep and getting good nutrition and having social contact and drinking enough water um, and we make an extraordinary number of decisions over the course of the day. We shoulder a lot of risk on our, in our unique burdens, and we make an extraordinary number of decisions. That's relevant because willpower is just the ability to make good decisions, and you can only make so many each day. It's not like a genetic gift that you get. It's more like gas in the tank that you wake up with. And every time you make a decision, not just food decisions, even like who takes Jenny to soccer practice and what clothing you're going to wear today, um, you're wearing down your willpower. Then you add to that we don't feel like we have the time to really feed ourselves, so we stop for all those bags and boxes and containers, or we're in environments where we're just inundated with bags and boxes and containers. And it's kind of a perfect storm to that's set up to turn us into 300-pound people with heart attacks and strokes and all the unfortunately diet preventable, diet reversible types of habits. So that, there are ways to reverse this, there are ways to combat it, but you kind of have to step back and accept that it's a different kind of lifestyle, that we're stressing our psyches, we're stressing our bodies to the max in a lot of ways. And we're going to have to prioritize a little bit differently if you want to stop doing that. And I can't tell you how many, a long time ago, I used to go around doing focus groups and travel the country and stuff. And I can't tell you how many executives in the back room would say, Glenn, I can't stop overeating and it's killing me, you know? And I remember when I first wrote the book, I, people would get mad at me. They would say, you know, I'm not fat because I want to be fat. I'm fat because I'm effing hungry. And that's the experience that most people have. They get effing hungry. And it doesn't feel like this moral choice or this, easy road to go this way or that way. It feels like just hand over the cheesecake and nobody gets hurt, you know? And there's a reason for that. And then I'll slow down and let you ask questions and whatnot. But the reason for that is that our reptilian brains 100,000 years ago had to develop ways of acquiring scarce resources. Food was not abundant 100,000 years ago, especially as we, um, went through the ice ages and we had to kind of fight for more scarce resources. And so it developed these routines for ultra motivating us when we saw a cue that might lead to food, and for making us miserable if we didn't follow those cues. And so it doesn't really feel like a conscious choice. And whenever the brain perceives an emergency, and in today's environment, it's usually a false emergency, then it pushes the rational brain out of the way. So it doesn't matter how many books you read or what diet you're planning to follow on Monday morning. And it says, just eat, just effing eat. Um, and so that's why it's a fairly straightforward explanation with a couple of different levers. And it's a little bit of it's a painful experience when you're in it, but there are solutions to overcome it if you want to work on it. So
Well, I think it's really great. Thank you for sharing. And certainly if it's someone who tunes in, if it's not us that's tuning in, there's a good chance someone we know, right, that is struggling with this. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about when you said that these executives that you'd be doing these studies, and the executives would literally be saying, I'm struggling with this. This is what's going on, which are going to have similar, I would imagine, similar decision fatigue and stressful environments, similar to entrepreneurs and running a business. Very similar in that regard. Um,
absolutely.
and so when you started kind of making this shift and this change to helping people through these challenges and through these struggles that they're dealing with, what are some of the things that you found that maybe have allowed someone to find success with some of the strategies they would even implement? Certainly I'd love, some of the strategies are great, but what are some of those success indicators you found?
Well, the first guy that I helped with success was me. Because I don't know if you know, I used to be 300 pounds, and if it wasn't nailed down, or if the Woodbury Country Deli was out of pizza and Pop-Tarts, I probably got there before you. I had a lifetime of struggle until I was about 40, and I went all the traditional routes. I'm a psychologist from a family of 17 psychotherapists. And when something breaks in the house, we all ask it how it feels and nobody can fix it. So when you have a hammer, everything feels like a nail. And that was my journey. I tried to love myself then. I thought if I could fill that hole in my heart, then I wouldn't have to keep trying to fill that hole in my stomach. That's the essence of what I did. Um, but I eventually realized, because I was consulting for big food companies, that they were engineering these hyperpalatable concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and excitotoxins and salt. And it was all designed to hit the bliss point in your reptilian brain without giving you enough nutrition to feel satisfied. Um, and what what I realized what was happening was that it was seducing the reptilian part of the brain into thinking this is where the good stuff is, in these bags and boxes and containers. This is what you need to survive. Because let's face it, um, on the savannah 100,000 years ago, I couldn't go downstairs and get 100,000 calories and come back upstairs in 10 minutes, right? But for $100, I guarantee you I could walk into the convenience store and buy 100,000 calories and go across the street and do it again. Um, so I realized that I was going to have to separate from the reptilian brain, and this is the first indicator of success, people's willingness to recognize that there are these two parts of the brain. There's this reptilian brain that's eat, mate, or kill. If it sees something in the environment, it says, do I eat it? Do I mate with it, or do I kill it? And then there's a neocortex that says, wait a minute, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact does that have on your long-term goals and the people that you love and what you're trying to accomplish in the world? And I said, I have to know when this thing is waking up if I'm going to get control over it. Maybe this is not a game of loving my inner child back to health. Maybe this is more of a game of ruthless domination. Maybe I have to tell this thing to shut up and go back in its cage. It's kind of silly. So here's what I did, and then I'll talk about the layers of sophistication that came across with other people. um, I decided, and I was not going to teach this, and this is rather embarrassing because I'm a sophisticated executive and, Ph.D. and everything, and I never thought I'd be on shows like yours talking about this publicly. But I decided this was my inner pig. And I said that if I had a rule, for example, I'll only ever have chocolate on Saturdays and no more than 4 ounces. And it was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was in a coffee shop, and there's a big old chocolate bar on the counter calling to me. And I heard this voice that says, "Oh, just start your silly diet again tomorrow. You worked out hard enough. You're not going to gain any weight. A little chocolate bar is not going to hurt." I would say, wait a minute, that's not me. That's my inner pig, and it's squealing for pig slop because chocolate on a Wednesday, according to my definitions, is slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. Like after all the sophisticated interventions that I tried, that was the one. It wasn't a miracle, but what the miracle was that I suddenly had these extra microseconds at the moment of impulse to make different decisions. And I had time to experiment with what I could do to make different decisions. So for me personally, and it's different for the other people that I've helped in many ways, but for me personally, it was all about pausing long enough to hear what the pig was saying. So it'll be just as easy to start tomorrow. And I would say, wait a minute, that's not true. That's neurologically false because what fires together wires together. That's the principle of neuroplasticity. So if I say it'll be just as easy to start tomorrow, and then I eat the chocolate, I will have reinforced the craving and I'll reinforce the tendency to say start tomorrow. So I'm more likely to say start tomorrow, and I'm going to have a deeper craving tomorrow. If you're in a hole, you better stop digging and always use the present moment to be healthy. And that little structure, the ability to pause, listen to what you can call it your food master. You don't have to call it your inner pig. But for me, for 8 years, it was my inner pig. So it's hard for me to think of it in any other way. Um, the ability to pause and disempower the logic of what your pig was saying, it reintroduced a feeling of cognitive dissonance. Because what happens when you say, "Oh, I can just start tomorrow," is you're making it really comfortable to break your own rule. And you don't really want to be comfortable breaking your own rule. You want to be like, "Oh, I promised myself this, and I want to be a man of integrity. I want to walk the walk. I want to be in control of my impulses. I want to be my pig's master. I don't want to be my pig's BAATCH. I want to be in control. I want to feel like I'm the one who's in control of my impulses. Um, that was enough for me over several years. It took me several years to do this. It doesn't take years anymore. But it was enough for me over several years keeping a journal, me versus my inner pig, to recover. And I lost about at one point it was down to about 100 pounds. I maintained about an 80-pound weight loss at this point. Um, and when I got divorced in 2016, in 2015, as I was getting divorced, I wrote this into a book. I took the whole journal, put it into a book. Long story short, the book gets crazy popular, like over 1 million readers. Psychology Today asks me to write for them. I get 1 million readers there also. And all of a sudden, I have all these people saying, "Glenn, I've got a pig inside me too. Help me to overcome my inner pig." And I thought, wait, this is what I'm famous for. But you kind of you go with what happens as an entrepreneur. It's the riding a bucking bronco does not always take you where you thought it was going to take you. So I opened up a little agency, and over the next 8 years, we have about 2,000 clients all over the world asking for help to implement this method. And we learned a whole bunch of things. We learned that there aren't that many excuses. I thought 2,000 people, you'd have 2,000 different excuses to overeat. There's more like about 4 or 5 dozen of them. People tend to use the same excuses over and over again. And that made it possible for us to learn how to disempower those excuses really quickly. So we kind of came up with a little pamphlet and wrote down our best refuge. I say we because I had two business partners and I had 10 coaches that were working along with me. And so we came up with this pamphlet, and we got down to the point that, and I'm going to pause soon. I just want to finish the story. Uh, we got down to the point where within a month, if people would work with us, some people buy programs and then they disappear. But the people who would work with us within a month, they would be down 84% in terms of their binge eating episodes, overeating episodes. And I thought, great, that's about as good as I think we're going to do in the first month. But then when I followed up at month 6 or month 12, I would find that there were a whole bunch of people that dropped off and they just stopped doing it. The people who kept doing it were down to around 80%, which was acceptable. But the people that stopped doing it, they were basically back to where they were, if not worse. And I say, well, why in the world would people stop? Like, I don't tell anybody what to eat. I help people make their own rules. They eat what they want to eat. I don't take any food away from people in any way, shape, or form. I give them back a sense of control and identity. Why in the world would you want to stop doing that? And so I did this survey and they say, I just get to the point where I figured, oh, well, what the hell? I don't have any excuses. You took them all away, but I just really want to. So screw it, just do it. We call it the screw it, just do it response. And I said, what is causing that? Like what? Because and then I remembered that I had those experiences sometimes also along my way. I just kind of fought through them. And inevitably, what was causing that were the list of things that I told you about before that most entrepreneurs feel. The lack of regular nutrition, regular sleep, the lack of enough social contact, making too many decisions, not having enough time away from the rat race to kind of think things through. And we call it all under the rubric of organismic distress. It's a psychological term that really means stress, where you're really stressed out and your brain thinks there's an emergency and it has to accumulate resources quickly to deal with the emergency. And that's where this was all coming from. And so we started to implement things that would interfere with that. We had little nutrition checklists. We had we told people to take 2 5-minute breaks every day, like put down your cell phone, walk away from the computer. Nobody can talk to you. Go hide in the bathroom if you have to go hide in the bathroom, but take 2 5-minute breaks a day. And people would say, it's kind of miraculous, just that extra 5-minute break. And I feel like a new person again. Preferably it would be longer. Preferably there would be more of them, but 2 5 minutes of breaks was enough to make a difference. Um, we discovered that if people reviewed their social networks, they didn't necessarily have to be partying all the time, but they needed to feel like they weren't isolated, like they could reach their social network if they needed to. It was the perception that you were isolated from the tribe that was causing the false experience of an emergency. Um, we learned about a certain type of breathing called parasympathetic breathing, where you breathe in for a count of 7, you breathe out for a count of 11. That signals the brain that there's no hungry tiger chasing you and it's okay to think and come back into your rational brain. And we focus a lot on those methods to calm people down and help them to stick to their plans. And that's what I've done for the last 10 years. Is I read a whole bunch of books about it. The best one is the last one, Defeat Your Cravings, and that's what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, and I'd love for you to share again. Defeat Your Cravings. You said it was a book. So someone who you just shared just some great information. So someone might say, "Oh my goodness, Glenn, I'd love to read one of your books or learn more. Where can they go? What should they do?"
Oh, I didn't mean to be so promotional so early in the interview, but if you go to defeatyourcravings.com and click on the big blue button, you'll get a copy of the book in the button says free book. And ironically, there's a free book behind that. So you can get it in Kindle, Nook, or PDF for free. The traditional formats have more traditional charges. And you not only get the book, but you get a set of recorded coaching sessions so you can see how this works in practice. And you get a food plan starter template so you can adjust it to the way that you want to eat and a whole bunch of other things to recover from mistakes and things like that. So that's at defeatyourcravings.com. But I recommend you start by reading the book.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very, very good. Thank you so much. And I don't think it's promotional at all. I mean, I think this is a fascinating topic and I love that you are out willing to have these conversations and just talk about this because you have a unique, in my opinion, a very unique perspective, having previously worked for some of these organizations that were producing the foods and these items that we're eating, and recognizing, oh my word, you saw firsthand what was going on there, and then kind of like a pendulum swung all the way to the other side to start helping folks push through this. So I think it's just a really unique perspective and vantage point, and you've personally gone through it yourself,
I
and
have.
you're a living testimony to your own work.
So you asked me, Tom, what distinguishes people that were successful versus those that weren't.
Yes, yes,
Um, there's one thing that's a really big deal. Most people have this ideal diet in mind. Like for me, it was the raw vegan diet. I was going to eat no meat or cooked products whatsoever. I was only going to have, fruit, more fruit, and leafy green vegetables, and that was going to be my life. For other people, it's the carnivore diet. For other people, it's 700 calories a day to get down to their goal weight pretty quickly. And what happens is when you go on some of those extreme diets, even if it is the best way to eat, like I still intellectually believe that probably not having cooked products and, eating mostly fruits and vegetables is probably the healthiest way to eat. But it's very difficult to sustain, particularly in our society, particularly by yourself. What I find is people do best when they start with one simple rule. So rather than say, you know, I'm going to be horrible and then I'm going to be really good. And then I'm going to be horrible and then I'm going to be really good. You remember the nursery rhyme, when she was good, she was very, very good, but when she was bad, she was horrid. That's how most people eat. The problem with that is you're signaling your brain that you live in a feast and famine environment. And our brains are set up, if food is scarce, to hoard it when it becomes available. So that urge you feel to dislodge your jaw and empty the entire contents of the deli tray into it, that's because your brain felt like you were trying too hard to lose weight before. And so I tell people the fastest way to lose weight is slowly. Let's start with one simple rule. Like I remember this truck driver who said, I'll tell you what, I have to eat at fast food establishments 3 times a day. I can't stop doing that. But I'll tell you what, I won't go back for seconds. And that was something that was doable for him. And what happens when you do that? You see yourself clearing this hurdle day after day, day after day, day after day. Not just the first couple of days when you have your mojo, but 2 weeks from now, when you wake up without your mojo, you say, oh, I can still do it. You trigger something we call the identity function in your brain. You start to say, I'm not just someone who's white knuckling this. I'm actually a person who doesn't go back for seconds. That's my identity. I'm someone who doesn't go back for seconds. That gives you a lot of juice and confidence to go forward. And so I find that people are much more successful when they start with one simple rule. And it doesn't have to be giving up something. It could be that I always put my fork down between bites, or I take 3 deep breaths before every meal. It doesn't have to be giving up something, but it has to be something you do without fail, or that you could and would do without fail, that wouldn't be too burdensome. It doesn't feel like a major, major reworking of your whole eating and exercise routine. It's just one simple thing. Do that for a couple of weeks. Define that rule. As soon as you do, you're going to hear this voice inside of you that says, this is stupid. That guy Glenn is an idiot. He's got a pig inside of him anyway. Why am I listening to him? Um, you're going to hear that voice, and that's what we want. That's the voice of your reptilian brain. That's the rationalization that you want to say, okay, wait a minute. I know now that I'm awake, I know there's something wrong with what this voice is saying. I might not know what it is. I know it feels like every bone in my body should listen to it, but what if I didn't? And then you take one of those 7-11 breaths, breathe in for a count of 7, breathe out for a count of 11, and say, why is my pig wrong? What's wrong with what it's saying? And it's usually winning with a half truth and a bigger lie. I gave you the example of start again tomorrow. Another example might be, oh, your parents were fat, so you're doomed. And you might as well just eat whatever you want to. And so you could take a breath and you could say, well, okay, what's the truth there? The truth is that obesity is genetic. There is a percent of the variance that's accounted for by genetics. It's a little less than half. Diet and lifestyle is still more important. So the truth is I have a bigger mountain to climb than most people because my parents were fat, and I have that. Not everybody does. I do. But it's a very climbable mountain. And it's certainly not true that binging as much as possible and getting as fat as I can is a good idea because my parents were fat, right? So let's look at reality. Let's look at the mountain I have to climb. But let's get to climbing it anyway. Um, so you do that kind of thing, and then and there's some other things you can study to understand the way that binges are extinguished over time, because it doesn't go straight down like this. Sorry about that. It doesn't it doesn't go straight down. It goes in more of a honeymoon curve and then a really big spike, and then it goes down, then a couple little spikes. So you can study how that happens so that you're not surprised and you don't think when you get this extinction burst, that's what they call it. And there are physiological reasons for that. You don't think that this is going to last forever, because what happens is most people get to somewhere in the 5 to 10 day range, and then they think, oh, I can't do this. This is horrible. This is torture. This is going to last forever. But it won't. You just have to power through. And then it starts to come down. And then at the end, your brain will label that association, that pathway, as dormant. It'll say, well, it doesn't seem to work if I get Glenn all excited when he passes the Dunkin' Donuts sign anymore. So I don't want to waste his energy. So I'm going to label this as dormant. Maybe in the future it'll work. Maybe he'll decide to go back and reward me when I throw up all this energy then. But in the meantime, I can't waste the survival energy. I have to find calories elsewhere. But that takes somewhere between 30 and 45 days to get to that point. Um, so that's that's how you do it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And one thing you mentioned about this self-funded study with these more than 40,000 participants, and I don't know if some of the information you've shared has come from that study, but I'd love for you just to share maybe some of the things you've learned or taken away that you maybe haven't covered, because I think that's significant.
That, First of all, that study was done in the days when internet clicks were cheap. I was getting visitors for a penny or two over to my website. That's how I was able to get 40,000 people without going broke. But this was important to me, and I did spend, oh, maybe $10,000 over the years on traffic, maybe more. I forget. But that study led me to the wrong conclusion, and it was the last thing that led me to the wrong conclusion. At that point, I thought that there were specific emotions behind every binge impulse. And what I found in the study, it validated that in some ways, although it was a small validation. I found that people who craved chocolate, they tended to be lonely or depressed or brokenhearted. And people who crave salty, crunchy things like salty, crunchy carbs, chips, and things like that, they tended to be stressed at work. And people who craved soft, chewy things like pizza or pasta or bagels, they tended to be stressed at home. And so I thought, okay, well, now I have the key. Now I just have to figure out how do you solve loneliness or being brokenhearted, as if that's easy. And how do you solve, how do you solve stress at work? How do you solve stress at home? And there were a number of things I was ignoring in that simplistic formulation. But this actually led me to the idea of the pig inside of me, because I called my mom. My mom was a chocolate binger also. And I said, Mom, I struggle with chocolate. I'm overweight and I'm really trying to figure this out. And, I love you. And whatever happened, it happened 40 years ago. This was a long time ago now. I'm 61 now. I said, Mom, why do you think I go to chocolate when I feel lonely or brokenhearted or depressed? I know I'm not in a great marriage and I have these feelings, but why do I run to chocolate? And why do you run to chocolate at those times? And she got this horrible look on her face, just like horrible, ashamed look on her face. And she says, Honey, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. And I said, Mom, this was 40 years ago. I don't care. I love you. I forgive you. I just want to figure it out. And she said, Well, when you were a boy, maybe 1 year old, your dad, my husband, was a captain in the army, and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam in 1965. And I was terrified I was going to be, a widow with two kids. I was terrified that's what was going to happen. We were trying to have your sister, and I was just terrified. At the same time, your grandfather, my dad, had just gotten out of prison, and I didn't know he was guilty, but he was. And he had disappeared for a couple of years, and I was horribly depressed. So half the time when you came running up to me for love or nurturance or cuddles or play, I didn't have it in me to give it to you. I was sitting and staring at the wall. And so what I did is I kept a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup in a refrigerator on the floor. And I'd say, go get your Bosco, right? And so, man, if this was a movie, there it is. That's the movie moment. This is the cause. This is why I'm messed up with chocolate. Um, and you would think if this were a movie that mom and I would have a big cry and a big hug and I would never have a problem again, right? But I actually, my problem got worse. The reason my problem got worse was because there was this little voice in my head that said, you know what, Glenn? You're right. Our mama didn't love us enough. And she left a great big chocolate-sized hole in our heart. And until you can find the love of your life or get out of the marriage or fix the marriage, you're going to have to go right on eating chocolate. Yippee, let's go get some more. And it like took advantage of it. And I said, there's something wrong here. This doesn't make sense. And at that point, I started formulating the idea that emotional eating wasn't what people thought it was. People think like emotions is this fire, and you have this fire, and it gets out and it burns down the house. And so the only way to fix it is to put out the fire. But we light fires in houses all the time. We just have really good fireplaces. And it might be a lot easier to build a really good fireplace than to put out the fire. So at that point, I stopped looking for ways to solve my loneliness or depression. I mean, I didn't stop looking. I've worked on that my whole life. But I stopped expecting that that was the solution, or stopped telling myself that I was going to have to overeat until I could fix that. And instead, I worked on the fireplace. And the fireplace was all of these rational refutations that, prevented the fire from getting out. I then also learned that there's actually a two-way relationship between emotions and overeating. Um, so people think that let's work with anxiety because that's probably the most frequent one people tell me about. People tell me they can't sleep without eating a whole big plate of carbs because they feel too anxious. And I say, well, anxiety is a physiological experience with a cognitive label on it. Your heart rate goes up, you start perspiring a little more, your galvanic skin response goes up, your blood pressure goes up a little bit. We can measure those things. There are studies in animals where we've rewarded them for feeling what we think is anxious when their heart rate goes up, when their blood pressure goes up. And we give them a sugar reward when that happens. Don't you know that when you do that, those animals produce higher blood pressure, more perspiration, and so it actually goes both ways. You are operantly conditioning, you can look that up, operant conditioning. You're operantly conditioning the anxiety with the sugar. And what actually happens, it's the same thing with smoking. If you if you stop smoking, what, smoking actually makes you more nervous and stressed out overall. But then when you have the cigarette, it comes down to normal. It's kind of the same thing with emotional eating. Like you're teaching yourself the emotional eating is making you more anxious and nervous overall. And then for the moment that you have it, it comes down to normal because you're overloading the digestive system. There's not enough energy for the nervous system to conduct the emotions. So this is a two-way thing here. And then I learned there was a way to reframe emotional eating. Most people say, well, I'm eating for comfort. It's like the Golden Girls. Let's go get the cheesecake. One of us got dumped or whatever. I'll get the cheesecake. And ho, 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 ha, ha, ha. Well, if you think you're a comfort eater, you're giving your pig an excuse to, generate more cravings and make you eat more. If you tell yourself instead, no, I'm trying to get high with food. That's what I'm doing. Because these things that I'm eating, cheesecake, chocolate bars, Doritos, Pop-Tarts, we didn't have those on the Savannah. Those are unnaturally concentrated forms of calories and taste stimulation. You're actually getting high with food. It's perfectly legal. You're going to find a lot of support for it in our society. We live in a world where um, everybody tacitly supports each other to slowly kill themselves with food. Everything in moderation, ho ho, ha ha, hee hee, let's do it. While we all sit between four walls and stare at our computer screens and hope electrons flow into our bank account, especially entrepreneurs, right? So how did I get onto all this? So you were asking me about that study.
Mm-hmm.
That study was the last vestige of my trying to prove that you had to solve emotional problems in order to stop overeating. That's when I said, okay, this is just wrong. I need to work at it from another angle. That's how that study helped me.
Well, I appreciate you share that. That's really great insight. And as being a good scientist, it sounds like the data showed you something, and you learned, uh, and you then took that new form knowledge and moved to the next thing, right? It just led you one step closer to where you were looking to go. So I think that's wonderful. Um, well, Glenn, this has been phenomenal with all of the information you've shared here. I guess in terms of a first step, I know you talked about the book. What's a first step someone that tunes into this that they might be able to take to kind of start heading down this direction to learn from what you've been sharing here?
Take a deep breath. Ask yourself, if I could only do one thing, if I can only make one change, and it's got to be an easy change, but it would make a big difference. It would be the difference between the ship pointing in the wrong direction and the ship pointing in the right direction, even though it's not going very fast in the right direction. How, how would you implement that one thing? How would you set up a rule to implement that? Um, you know, I don't eat after 8 o'clock, or I always start my day with two big green smoothies or 16 ounces of green smoothies, or I put my phone in another room before I go to bed at night. So one discipline. Freedom is built upon discipline. It's not the way that people think. It doesn't oppose it. It's actually built upon it. If there was one discipline that you could adopt, what would it be? I can't tell you what that is, but you know what that is if you take a breath. I swear to you, you know what that is. Once you know that what that is, and make it easy, make it something you feel like is easy, then start listening for your inner food monster or your inner pig or whatever you want to call it. Just don't make it a cute pet or your inner wounded child. This is something you don't want to be in charge. Start listening for your inner food monster to speak up and try to convince you to break the rule. Because that's what this state of addiction is. It's feeling both ways about something, and this really just bifurcates the brain and makes it possible to see that. Write down what it says. Write it out in full. Write down exactly what it wants you to do. Your parents were obese, so you're doomed. Just go ahead and eat the whole cheesecake now. Or you can start again tomorrow. You can make up for it next week, whatever it is. Take another breath. I'm talking about these 7-Eleven breaths, and ask yourself, why is that wrong? Write that down. Do this all in writing. There are limitations of short-term memory, which will prevent you from getting at the whole truth. So do it in writing. And then the last step is to ask yourself, well, what's going to make me a happier or better person if I stick to my plan, if I don't break the rule? And this takes a little time to figure out. But like for me, for example, if I only had chocolate once a week, I was going to be much less concerned about cardiovascular events. I really like to work out, and I wasn't going to have to drag 80 pounds around with me every day when I wanted to work out. I like climbing mountains. I could get up to the top about an hour or two faster if I was doing this. Um, I wanted to be around for my niece and my nephew. I was married at the time. I wanted to be a good husband. So, make a list of reasons, your big why you want to stick to this. And then, keep that within arm's reach. Keep it on your smartphone or in a little piece of paper in your coat jacket or something. And read that whenever your pig speaks up after you've gone through the refutation. That's the core of the method for overcoming overeating that I found. And when you're ready to go further, then come join us. And there's an awful lot of stuff for free on the site. Um, don't read the old books first. I've got 8 books on the market. Defeat Your Cravings is the book that was most recently written, incorporates the science of addiction formation and addiction's extinction, and has the benefit of my having worked with 2,000 people. The first book is the most popular book that was read by millions of people, but that book, it's just basically me in an angry diatribe against my inner pig. And it's very popular because it's kind of cool and people could relate to it, but it doesn't tell you everything you really need to know to overcome this. So by all means, go back and read that one after if you want to, but go to Defeat Your Cravings first.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure we include that in the notes when this gets published. I'm so grateful for you to be here again and sharing this information, Glenn. And for those of you that are tuning in, if you have not subscribed to our podcast at the Franchise Your Business podcast or the Multiply Your Success podcast, please do so in your favorite podcast station. And then, of course, you can catch all this on our YouTube channel, which is Big Sky Franchise Team on YouTube. So grateful for having everyone here. Enjoy your weekend. Hopefully, the weather is starting to break wherever you're located across the country, starting to see some glimmers of spring in the air. And really appreciate you all being here. Have a great rest of your day.